Hi all, let's have a look at another fascinating game from the TSEC Season 17 Premier Division. So this is in round 29. Leela was playing against Stoffles, so battle of the neural networks. Let's have a look at this game. So the first 8 moves: e4, c5, a Sicilian defense, and we go into the Scheveningen variation. So a6 I consider a major upgrade to this. This allows the dreaded Keres attack after Paul Keres, one of the greatest Estonian chess players who had his face on even currency and notes and stuff. A highly celebrated sportsman in his own right. So we have h6. By the way, a little bit of trivia. Keres also played a lot of correspondence chess. So, and if you want to play correspondence chess, King's Crusher TV, and I'll invite you for a game. He was a big correspondence player early in his career. So anyway, we have Leela playing here. So h6 is one of the safest routes, so not allowing g5. Knight c6 has been played before, but h6 I believe is considered like the safest approach here for black if you are going to play this position. We have h4. And now a really committal decision. This is the move that kind of surprises me. e5. It kind of gives a gaping strategic hole on d5. It makes it a kind of version, a bad version, I would say, of the Sicilian Sveshnikov in a way. Because these knights are ready to control key squares without hopping around. In a mainline Sveshnikov, the knight would have come like this to b5 to a3, c3, knight c2 to e3. But here you can see that the knights are in contact pretty soon with key squares. But before we get into that, knight c6 has been seen in the game Kasparov against Sachs in Tilburg 1989. That game, for the record, went rook g1, Kasparov playing very, very aggressively with white. So this is a lot of pressure on the black position, and he even went for that h5, and he sacked that h5, and he got the rook crashing down there, and there's a lot of pressure on the black position, doubling rooks there, opening up, trying to open up the f file, and I think there's a tactical disaster coming up. Black is under great pressure. So knight h5 there, taking some squares around the king, and bishop h6 is going to be winning the queen after takes. I'll put this on the board. This was the finish, otherwise the king moves, take the knights, but here we're just going to win the queen. So yeah, Kasparov cracked through the opponent's defences there, but that is generally regarded as, that this has been played before knight c6 here in this particular position. So e5 is a little bit surprising. So you can see after knight f5, this is a very nice position. Knight c6, end of book. So yeah, actually they didn't have too much choice here. Yeah, it wasn't the strategic decision of Stoffles. So which makes sense actually, because I think neural networks would generally avoid structural issues like that. Generally, they'd be able to sort of sense that. I think they're better on pawn structure management. So this is kind of a miserable position to be playing. Leela plays knight e3. This is a very, very sensible move. It does protect g4, puts the knights in contact with key strategic squares. Slight downside, you might argue, well, this knight can go to d4 and it's kind of a nuisance. It would have to be kicked away at some point, surely. So interesting position. Bishop c2 has been Bishop g2 has been seen before in the game Hari Krishna against Yifan Hu. That was in Weekend Z 2013. That ended in a win for black, actually. So that's another reference game there. So, but knight e3, very interesting move. Bishop e7. We have bishop d3, and now black doesn't really want to castle into castling into this storm, and plays actually knight h7. So this is a nifty looking move, trying to encourage h5. That would be the dream for black, which would probably give black at least an equal position. But Leela plays the dynamic g5. So h5 would just be giving up dart squares basically. Black could play strategically with bishop g5, try and weaken white on the dart squares, and should be well, at least better than the game. Black might even have a small edge here. That's a good use of the g5 square. That would be a terrible strategic mistake, basically. So g5, much more dynamic, here is played. And that's and now we have hg. So you see the knight's pinned. This represents a pawn sack, and you might wonder, what is this about? Well, bishop e6 was played, not taking on g5. So what is that about when it's at home? Bishop takes g5. Let's examine it for a moment. Knight ed5 is actually pretty powerful here. This nasty pin, the knights have got good access squares. Say bishop takes, queen takes, bishop e6. White essentially plays queen e3 and laughs at black. Black is in a great deal of pain and suffering here, actually, in this position, believe it or not. So say, as an example, queen a5, there's actually a really strong move here in the form of a3, saying to black, if you castle queenside, you're going to lose your queen. So king d7 is basically forced. Just to put that on the board, this is just an example. If castling b4, when does the queen go? You can see the power of that knight on d5, and it's a very dominating position. The queen's been trapped. And if king d7, of course, that's extremely miserable to have to play that here. So this is just is going to be better for white. Doesn't, you know, the pawn sacrifice is fully justified here. This gigantic knight on d5. So anyway, so it's ignored. The pawn sack is ignored with bishop e6. And now we have knight ed5. It's quite a dominating position here with these knights. They're kind of strangling black strategically. And yeah, there's a kind of there's a mistake here. Well, it's been labelled as a mistake by many, but it's a very difficult position for black. Black, believe it or not, played bishop takes g5. Before we get into that, you can see bishop takes and knight c7 is going to be winning the exchange. So very, very interesting, bishop takes g5. But before we get into that, if black plays knight d4, then f4 is good. For example, this position, bishop f1, hitting the knight. And white should end up with a very nice advantage here. This position, there's a good target here. White's got good pressure. There's quite a bind. So that's difficult for black. And also, if we look at queen d7 for a moment, then bishop e3, this position is bishop takes a7. So black has to be wary about casting queenside when there's a big knight on d5. For example, like this. And so what does black do there? That's horrible. So, and if black doesn't castle queenside, well, it's a tricky position. So yeah, it's a difficult position. So let's have a look now. So bishop takes g5. So it's been regarded as a huge blunder. Bishop takes, queen takes. So what is Stovlev's thinking here? Is it some major miscalculation? So Stovlev has had some brilliant results, even beating Stockfish on occasion. Why would it do this? Is this wild Anderson style? Ulf Anderson, one of the romantic era players, reckless kind of sacrifice for the kingside attack. Check, king e7, and Leela is a bit boring, takes the rook. Okay, we have queen g2, so very dashing play from black. What's the big danger here? Attacking the rook is also protecting f3, meaning knight d4 to f3 and bishop g4. These across the light squares look dangerous. Leela plays one of the very best moves, of course, here though, queen h5. If we look at alternatives in this position, if rook f1, then that's asking for knight g5, and you can see that the black pieces are really springing into action here with a vengeance. So for example, queen e2, knight d4, that's a total disaster. If the queen moves to d2, then there's knight f3 check, either knight to f3, ouch, a world of pain. So yeah, black can't be allowed to spring into action here. And if king d2, then black can just get a potential attack if white's not going to find this key move which is played. But if white finds it here, they can play it in a delayed fashion, still with the big advantage. But it was played immediately, and this is it's up to black to show compensation here. So there's a big mystery now. What is the compensation? Knight g5 is played. So offering the other rook. So this is a romantic era style game, both rooks being offered. We have got, it looks as though, you know, this looks potentially quite dangerous, right? There's 4 attacking pieces, the king's still in the centre. So isn't it natural to sacrifice both rooks? Well, Leela is boring and does take this rook, asking, well, okay, prove it. Who would have thought this is an engine game? Who says engine games are boring? Not nowadays. Especially with Stoffler's playing like this. Just sacrifice both rooks. Where's the attack? Knight f3 check. We see king d1. Queen takes f2. So there's a concrete threat of mate in 1. So guess what Leela plays here? It's a move which meets the requirements of the position, you could say. And the last time I said such a comment, it was like the only move in the position, actually. But yeah, this is probably one of the only moves in the position, but it is sufficient to meet the requirements here. I hope you can find it if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. How would you parry this mate in 1? So 5 seconds, white to play, 500 points defensively. Okay. Make the romantic players cry after sacrificing both rooks with knight b1, a knight retreat. I would have thought. Okay, sometimes these knight retreats are difficult to calculate. So knight b1, and you could ask, where is the compensation here? Yeah, it's getting tricky. So at move 20, black played here knight b4. You might ask, instead of knight b4, what about just pointing at the king here with bishop g4? This looks pretty direct. What does white do in this position? Well, actually, there's actually a really good move here available. What would you play with white in this position? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. 200 points. White to play. Okay, queen takes g7. Yeah, just hitting that bishop. And it doesn't matter what black does here. It's worse. If knight g5 check to shield the bishop with discovered check, this isn't a problem of king c1. It seems. Queen e3 check, knight d2, knight b4, knight c7. This knight's rerouting back to d5 with advantage. And here, you know, even queen f8 is winning. The king, the black king, is actually worse than the white king. It goes into a forced checkmate here. And even if white didn't want to play that forced checkmate, this kind of position here, white can actually do well just with moving the rook. So, for example, e4 check, and then activate this rook with rook a3 coming up. So white's going to untangle the position and develop like that. So yeah, bishop g4 doesn't seem sufficient at all because of queen takes g7. If knight cd4, this is another attempt to make these pieces work really hard together. Again, knight c7, bishop g4. Again, there's queen takes, sorry, knight d5 check here, actually, is best, probably. And then queen takes g7, so hitting that bishop. If knight h2 check, king c1, again, there's no attack, it seems. It's not very convincing. There's no follow-up. So yeah, I think Stoffles has overcooked this in the stew. Knight b4, it's not beef stew today, it's something else. It's undercooked. Attack. Knight c7 is played. So here, yeah, it's getting interesting here for sure. Black here played bishop g4. in this position. You might ask, hold on a sec, what about knight takes d3? On c takes, this position, queen e3 is interesting to consider, but check, knight takes e6, and white is really getting out of the checks eventually with big material advantage. If we look at this line again, on c takes d3, there is another question here about queen takes b2. On queen takes b2, yeah, it looks a little bit scary for that rook. This is a very chaotic looking position. White can play check, and here check again, and here knight takes e6 with a huge threat actually. I wonder if you can guess after queen takes a1 what white plays. Hope you can spot it. 100 points. Might want to pause the video. There's knight f8 checkmate. So the black king is in grave danger as well in many of these lines. So this queen takes b2, yeah. This knight takes e6, and if black has to waste time with f takes, then queen e7, giving up this rook, but yeah, white is checkmating here. White is a rook up as well as checkmate, so good stuff for white. So anyway, bishop g4 was played here. Now in this position, it's not queen takes g7, but queen e8 check, king f6, queen d8 check, king g6, queen takes d6 check, and this is picking up this knight, queen takes b4. So yeah, what's going on here? What has black got to show here? Queen g2, we have rook f1, a5, queen e7. It looks as though there's no attack after queen h2. It doesn't look very convincing. Knight e6. So white's actually creating threats now as well. We have knight d4 check, king c1. Bishop takes e6. So white has sacrificed a piece to gain some time here. Knight d2. You might wonder, if white didn't sacrifice a piece, what would happen? If king c1 check knight d2, white could sacrifice a piece like this actually, and with b3 still be better. This is another way of sacrificing back material, and it ends up with an advantage for white. Yeah, I mean, white's still an entire rook up, even after giving up a piece there in that line. So there are various ways to give back material. So this one was used. So knight d4, king c1, bishop takes. So gives white some breathing space. Knight d2, a4. We have b3, bishop h3. This is all a bit desperate and unconvincing right now. If black had tried a3 then c3, just nudging the knight to win the bishop. If the bishop goes there, then just take the knight and it's loads of material up for white. Yeah, it's all over really, it seems. Bishop h3, king b2, queen takes d2, so offering that piece for this check, because here it's very difficult for the black king's safety. If the king moves to h5, then check, queen takes g7, so lots of mates threatened, and if check, these checks kind of run out, and if queen a5 instead, well, they run out, king b2, and if knight takes, yeah, just take here and it's all winning. Yeah, there's hardly any checks there. So here we have bishop g2, rook ad1, queen f2, and now rook takes. Yep, still material up for white, so b takes, extinguishing any threats there. Now, okay, the rook's hit, that moves. It's a rook up. It is actually a rook up, as you can see. Queen takes there, allowing even the check, but it doesn't matter. The king's getting out of them. And here it ended with a checkmate, this game. Yes, none of this +10 yet. Stoffler's, I think there's something up with the evaluation, so that's why it just played to the end, Stoffler's games. So yeah, that was a double rook sack by Stoffler's. Very Alf Anderson style romantic era chess. So who says these engine games are boring? They're not very boring at all. In fact, I think they're more interesting than a lot of over-the-board games by a long shot, quite often. So I hope you enjoyed it. You might want to invite me for a game indirectly. Just use kingscrusher.tv and register with that, and I'll invite you for a game shortly after. Or you can use bit.ly/chessmold. You can join me on Discord. There's a lot of T-Seckers and other people now. It's getting quite lively. kingscrusher.tv/discord if you follow that link. Okay. Thanks very much.
Hello chess lovers, I have a very beautiful game for you played by Anatoly Karpov against Yevgeny Gik. The game was played in 1968 in Moscow. Karpov started with e4, c5 by black, Sicilian defense, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3 and g6. Black goes for dragon defense. Bishop e3, bishop g7, f3, black castles, bishop c4, knight c6, queen d2. We can see that Karpov is choosing this razor sharp Yugoslav attack. Queen a5, white castles, bishop d7, h4. Karpov is starting an immediate attack on the king side. Knight e5, bishop retreats back, rook c8, h5, knight takes h5, bishop h6. Karpov is trying to exchange these dark square bishops, and bishop takes h6 by black. Black had a very strong move in this position. Knight d3 check. If queen takes d3, then bishop takes h6 check, followed by bishop g7. It's very important when you are playing dragon defense to keep alive this dark square bishop, which is both protecting the king and also attacks white king. But instead we see bishop takes h6 in the game, queen takes h6, and here comes this standard exchange sacrifice in dragon variation. Rook takes c3, b takes c3, queen takes c3, knight e2, queen c5. By the way, if a move like knight d3 check, then this is losing for black. White can simply capture on d3. If queen a1 check, then king d2, queen takes h1. This is a forced line. g4, knight g3 protecting the queen, queen takes h1, knight takes h1, king e3, opening up this d file for the rook to attack black knight. And it turns out that actually black knight is trapped. Black can play bishop b5, but simply c4, bishop a6, and this is winning for white. Black knight is trapped. Let's go back. So after knight e2 we see queen c5 in the game, g4, knight f6, g5, knight h5, and here comes another exchange sacrifice, this time by Anatoly Karpov. Rook takes h5. Again, this is a very standard sacrifice in this variation. G takes h5, rook h1, queen e3 check, king b1, and queen takes f3. By the way, queen takes e2 is losing because of this queen takes h5 move. If e6, then queen takes h7 check, king f8, and black king is getting checkmated. Let's go back. That's why after king b1 we see queen takes f3, rook takes h5, e6. Black is opening up a space for the king to escape. And now comes a very strong move by Karpov. Can you find his next move? He played g6. This is just undressing black king. Black played knight takes g6, but a better move was capturing on g6 with a pawn. If queen takes h7 check, then king f8, queen queen h8 check, king e7, rook h7 check, knight f7, queen takes a8, queen takes e2, queen takes b7. This continuation of course would have been better for black, though again white is much better. By the way, right now the threat is rook takes f7 check followed by queen takes d7. Let's go back. After g6 we see knight takes g6 in the game, queen takes h7 check, king f8, and now comes another strong move by Karpov. Can you find his next move? Ready? He played rook f5, a fantastic rook sacrifice. Now the threat is queen takes f7 checkmate, and also the queen is hanging. That's why black decided to give up the queen by capturing on b3, a takes b3, e takes f5. Now comes another strong move by Karpov, knight f4. Black can't capture on f4 because of this queen h8 check, and black is losing his rook on a8. Black played rook d8, queen h6 check, king e8, knight takes g6, f takes g6, queen takes g6 check, king e7, queen g5 check, king e8, e takes f5, rook c8, queen g8 check, king e7, queen g7 check, king d8, f6, and black resigned. A very beautiful and destructive game by Anatoly Karpov. Your comments and questions please, and if you liked this double rook sacrifice, don't forget to give the thumbs up. Good luck. Hello chess lovers, Suren here, and in this video I want to share with you a brilliant attacking game played by Ukrainian chess grandmaster Mikhail Golubyev. His opponent is Yugoslav chess player Vladimir Podinich, and the game was played in 2001 in Bucharest. But before starting our game, first want to sharpen your tactical skills with a simple chess puzzle. Please take a look at this position and try to find the winning line for white. It's white to move, and I will wait for your answer in the comment section. Back to our main board, and now without further ado, let's get started with this fascinating game and see what happened on the board. Golubyev opened up with e4 and Podinich responded with Sicilian defense c5, knight f3 e6, knight c3, knight c6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and queen c7. Black goes for Paulsen variation, a very popular line which can be seen very often nowadays. Bishop e3, a6, bishop d3. One of the possible ideas for black is to develop the knight on f6, which we see in our game, and then put the bishop on b4 and put pressure on e4. But in our game, black would choose a completely different strategy. After white castling kingside, we have knight e5. This knight wants to jump on g4 square, and also if needed in some cases can capture on d3, thus getting rid of white's light squared bishop, which usually plays an important role when organizing an attack on the king side. Here we have h3, white acted against any possible knight g4 jumps, bishop c5, king h1, a prophylactic move, white is preparing f4, d6, f4, and black moved back his knight on g6. Here we have queen e1, the queen wants to jump on h4. Black castles kingside, but first we have f5, white is kicking away black knight, and then we have queen h4, b5. In return, black is advancing on the queen side, is preparing to fianchetto his queenside bishop, and a very interesting move by Mikhail Golubyev, rook f3. This move had been seen earlier several times, and it's quite possible that Golubyev was still in his preparations. White is going for an exchange sacrifice with the idea of opening up the G file for the second rook. Later in 2006, Magnus Carlsen would also choose this line against Maxim Vacher-Legrave. Here Vladimir Podinich made a mistake and accepted the rook sacrifice, which allows white to organize an irresistible attack. Instead, it was better first to capture on f5 and only then capture on f3. and then play bishop b7. This is what Maxim Vacher-Legraf played against Carlsen. But anyways, Carlsen managed to win that game. Probably we should also cover it as well. But meanwhile, after rook f3, we have knight takes f3. So the problem with this knight f3 is that after g takes f3, already if you play a move like e takes f5, then white is not forced to recapture. White can simply play rook g1. And black is actually facing serious problems. In our game, after g takes f3, we have queen b6 and rook g1. Yes, definitely black underestimated the power of this rook. By playing rook g1, white is also sacrificing his knight, and black accepted that piece sacrifice with bishop takes d4. Well, if a move like g6, then white can either capture on f6, or according to the engine, playing e5 and opening up the light squared bishop's diagonal is even stronger. If d takes e5, then f takes g6, and then bishop takes g6 with a destructive attack. But in our game, after rook g1, we have bishop takes d4. Now comes e5. Yes, white is opening up the light squared bishop's diagonal and is blocking the long diagonal. Already white can capture on f6. And also we have another sacrifice, right? The bishop, white is also offering his dark squared bishop. Bishop takes e3. Black is just munching every possible piece, like those unknown chess players were playing against famous chess masters in the romantic era of chess. And so after bishop takes e3, a question arises: how should white proceed with the attack? Now if you capture on f6, then you can lose your rook. That's why instead of allowing bishop takes g1, this bishop has already captured too many pieces. That's why Mikhail Golubyev went for rook takes g7 sacrifice. Look at this beauty, guys. We have the second rook sacrifice, and this leaves black no chance to survive. King h8 was played, but let's take a look at king takes g7, and in this case white can play e takes f6 check, followed by f takes e6. Once white is opening up the light squared bishop's diagonal, black king finds himself in a mating net. That's why in our game, after rook takes g7 check, we have king h8, but after rook takes h7 check, knight takes h7 f6, black resigned. Yes, truly the light squared bishop played a very important role, and as black king is in a mating net, we have a resignation. A very brilliant attacking game by Mikhail Golubyev, which I hope that you enjoyed greatly. Well, thanks for watching. In the end, here are more suggestions for you. Feel free to check them out as well. I will see you in my next video. Take care. Hello chess lovers, Suren here, and in this video I would like to share with you a fantastic game played by legendary Chinese chess grandmaster Xi Yun. She had two separate reigns as Women's World Chess Champion from 1991 to 1996 and from 1999 to 2001. Her opponent is Bulgarian chess player Antoaneta Stefanova, and this game was played in 1996 at Yerevan Chess Olympiad. Now let's see what happened on the board. Stefanova started the game with d4 and knight f6 by Xi Yun, knight f3 g6. Here King's Indian defense players or Grunfeld defense players are hoping for c4, but in this game Stefanova first played bishop f4, and after bishop g7 she played knight c3. White goes for hyper aggressive Bari attack. With this line, white is like sidestepping the main theoretical battle, is preparing to play e3, bring the bishop on e2, the knight on e5, and launch a devastating attack on the king's side. d5 was played, e3, black castled king's side, bishop e2, bishop g4, knight e5. We see the exchange of light squared bishops on e2 square, c6, and here we go, h4 is on the board. a5. In return, black is starting an advancement on the queen side, hoping that sooner or later white will castle queen side. g4, a4, a3, b5 and knight a2. Since black didn't play h5, it was better to go for h5, which looks a very ambitious move, but in the game after b5 we see knight a2, knight d7, now comes h5, but already this h5 move is not a very venomous one. Black exchanged the knights on e5 and then played f6. Instead of playing f6, of course, Xi-Yun could also exchange the dark squared bishops and then announce a check from a5, and then exchange the queens and play knight d7, but this looks very drawish. That's why after bishop takes e5 we see f6. Black still wants to keep alive the dark squared bishop, which can successfully defend black king. Bishop takes b8, rook takes b8, f4. Meanwhile, white is still advancing on the king's side, but we see e5. As white king is still stuck in the center of the board, black wants to open up the position. H takes g6, h takes g6, f5, e takes d4, queen h2. The queen is eyeballing on h7 square, but there are no direct threats. Black is doing great. Rook e8 was played, and finally white castled queenside. Now comes d takes e3, queen h7 check, king f8, queen takes g6 and e2. Suddenly black managed to gain a powerful passed pawn, which has already reached the second rank. Rook e1, queen d6, king b1, and now comes b4. White didn't dare to accept the pawn sacrifice and played rook h7. Well, if a takes b4, then rook e4 can be very strong with the idea of capture on b4 with the e-rook. But in the game after b4 we see rook h7, and after rook b7, once the rook is busy with protecting the bishop on g7, finally white captured on b4. Now comes queen g3, the rook is under attack. We see knight d3, rook e3. Right now, black is threatening to capture on d3, remove the defender and win the rook. And a mistake by Stefanova, king a2. Well, instead of king a2, rook takes g7 could give white great chances of gaining advantage. If rook takes g7, then queen takes f6 check, and then king a2. And now if rook takes d3, then already white queen can start chasing black king, and then f6 is very strong. If rook takes g4, then queen e7 check, and then rook takes e2. And if we have a look at the position, in here white has a huge advantage. Black has to be very careful. Black king is in danger. This passed pawn is marching forward. But in the game after rook e3, Stefanova missed her chance and played king a2, and rook takes d3 is on the board. If c takes d3, then simply queen takes e1. That's why white decided to create counter-attacking chances and finally captured on g7. But it turns out that already it's too late. Instead of recapturing, which actually favors white, Xi-Yun managed to find a brilliant combination which leads to a checkmate in 9 moves. You can pause the video and try to find black's next moves. Ready? In this position, the Chinese chess grandmaster first captured on b2, sacrificed the first rook, and after king takes b2, this time sacrificed the second rook. This is amazing, guys. Look at this. Right now there is a mating thread, but black is managing to find a forced line, and it turns out that the only king who is in a mating net is this white king. C takes b3, queen takes b3 check, king a1, queen c3 check, king b1. Well, if king a2, then black can first announce a check from d2, can force white king to step on the first rank, and then queen takes e1. In the game we see king b1, and after queen takes e1 check, Stefanova resigned. If king c2, then this time queen d1 check is coming, and then queen d2, and then after promoting the pawn to a queen, we have a checkmate on the board. A very impressive game, I think. Stefanova launched a devastating attack, but black managed to defend successfully, and in return, using the power of the pawn on e2, went for double rook sacrifice and killed the white king. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this game. For more games, consider subscribing to my channel. I will see you in the next video. Hello chess lovers! Suren here, and in this video I would like to share with you a fantastic game played by Brazilian chess grandmaster Alexander Fier. His opponent is Robert Vidal, and this game was played in 2018 at Batumi Chess Olympiad. Now let's see what happened on the board. Alexander Fier started with knight f3, ready opening d5 by Vidal, c4, d takes c4, black accepted the pawn offer and instantly white wants to win it back, a6, knight takes c4, meanwhile black is advancing on the queen side, knight e3, bishop b7 and g3, white is preparing to fianchetto his light squared bishop, a standard idea in ready opening e6, white castles kingside, bishop e7 and this time b3, this time white will fianchetto his dark squared bishop, black castles kingside, bishop b2 c5, queen c2, knight d7, both players are developing their pieces, nothing special, and we have an equal game, rook c1 h6, rook d1, rook c8, and queen b1, and after queen b6 white played queen a1. This is a standard idea in typical positions where white is bringing his queen on a1 square and cooperating together with the bishop is putting pressure on black's king side. Rook d8, h3, bishop f8, d3, bishop c6 and knight g4, knight takes g4, h takes g4, queen b7 and e4. a5, black is starting an advancement on the queen side, but it was better to act against this g5 move by playing f6. This could have given black's king side a better solidity, but in our game we have a5. Now comes g5, h takes g5, knight takes g5, white managed to open up the h file, and a few moves later this fact is going to play an essential role in the game. a4, bishop h3 and rook e8. Of course, a very passive approach. It was better to capture on b3 and then occupy the a file with the rook, and then bishop e7 trying to kick away the knight. But in our game, after bishop h3 we see rook e8, king g2, a takes b3, rook h1 and c4. This is a move which is losing on the spot. The thing is that instead of playing a takes b3, it was in here that black should have played c4, and if b takes c4 then a3, if bishop c3 then b takes c4. But in our game, after king g2 we see a takes b3, and after rook h1 here comes c4, but it's too late. In here Alexander Fier brought into life a brilliant combination, and please pause the video and try to find his next moves. Ready? Actually everything is ready for the final blow, and white went for bishop takes e6 sacrifice, the idea of which is to open up the h file for the rook. Rook takes e6 and here comes rook h8 check. Look at this brilliant rook sacrifice. By the way, after bishop takes e6, if move like f takes e6, then again this rook h8 is playable. In our game we have rook takes e6 and rook h8 check, and believe it or not, but in here black resigned. Now if king takes h8, then this time white can announce a check with a second rook and then can sacrifice it as well. The idea is to open up the queen's path, and after king takes h8 white can announce a check with the queen. If rook h6, then queen takes h6 using this pin, and then queen h7 checkmate. That's why in view of these lines, after rook h8 Robert Vidal resigned. A very impressive and instructive combination by Brazilian chess grandmaster, which I hope that you enjoyed greatly. Thanks for watching. For more games, consider subscribing to my channel. I will see you in the next video. After winning 2019 World Youth Chess Championship, Indian chess grandmaster Ramesh Babu Pragnananta is competing at 2019 World Junior Chess Championship, but without much success. In round 8 he suffered the second loss in this tournament, and in this video I want to share that same game played in round 8 against Spanish chess grandmaster Miguel Santos Ruiz. But before starting our game, make sure that you are subscribed in order not to miss my future uploads. In this game, Santos Ruiz was playing with white pieces and he opened up with e4. Pragnananta responded with Sicilian defense c5 and knight f3. e6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, and knight c6. We have the 4 knights variation, and knight takes c6. White is going for the exchange variation. B takes c6, e5, knight d5, knight e4. Later on in this line, usually white is trying to exploit the weakness of the dark squares. Here black played rook b8, but this is a very rare continuation. Usually in here black is proceeding either with queen c7 or bishop b7 or queen a5 check. But in our game we have rook b8. Here comes bishop d3, queen c7, the pawn is under attack, we have f4 and queen b6. Black is emphasizing the vulnerability of g1 a7 diagonal, queen e2, bishop e7, c4. White wants to kick away the knight from this perfect outpost, but in return black counterattacked white knight on e4. Here we have knight d6 check, bishop takes d6, e takes d6, knight goes back on f6, and b3. There was too much pressure on b2, which was hindering the development of the dark squared bishop. That's why Santos goes for b3 in order to fianchetto his bishop, bishop b2, and later this monster on b2 will play an essential role in the game. a5, and a very risky but at the same time interesting decision by Santos Ruiz, castling queenside. With this move he demonstrates that he's ready for a sharp battle and he's not afraid of black's attack. a4, bishop c2, a takes b3, a takes b3, and c5. It turns out that c5 is a mistake, after which black's position collapses quickly. Instead, it was better to make a prophylactic move like rook f7. But in our game we have c5, with which black is opening up the long diagonal in order to fianchetto the light squared bishop, but this taps into a mighty attack. Here we go g4. By the way, I have to tell you that instead of playing rook f7 in here, bishop a6 is also playable. Pinning the pawn and preparing a move like knight d5, and then if needed black can even go for queen e3 check, offering the exchange of queens. But in our game c5 was played and a powerful g4 by Santos Ruiz is on the board. With this move white wants to open up the g file and target black king, bishop b7, but let's take a look what if black accepts the pawn sacrifice. Then in this case white can play rook g1 with a direct rook takes g4 threat. If bishop b7 for example, then anyways this rook takes g4 is coming a mighty exchange sacrifice, which is allowing white to open up the g file, and then queen h5. These bishops are simply monsters, guys, and black is in trouble, white is winning. Or after g4, if a move like f takes g4, then again rook g4 with rook takes g4 threat. And if you play a move like h5, then simply h3, and again black has little chances of saving the game. Let's go back. In our game after g4, Pragnanantha played bishop b7 and rook g1, bishop e4. With this move black is neutralizing white's light squared bishop, but is doing it in the cost of giving up a pawn. Bishop takes c2, queen takes c2, e takes f5, and queen takes f5. Right now the threat is rook takes g7. For example, if a move like queen takes b3, then white can checkmate black king in 5 moves. Rook g1 check is coming. If king h8, then queen takes f6. Let's go for a queen sacrifice, guys, and announce a checkmate. Truly a spectacular checkmate, right guys? Who knows the name of the mating pattern? Please leave your comment. Meanwhile, let's see what happened in our game. After queen takes f5, Pragnanantha played this defensive knight e8 move, but even this didn't stop white from going for a rook sacrifice. Actually, the engine says that knight e8 allows white to checkmate black king in 7. Rook takes g7, here we go, guys. This is the first rook sacrifice in this game. Knight takes g7, queen e5, rook f7, and the last piece is also joining the attack. King f8, rook takes g7, queen d8, and the second rook sacrifice in our game, which forced Pragnanantha to resign. If king takes g8, then queen h8 checkmate is coming. Truly a brilliant attack by Ruiz Santos, which I hope that you enjoyed greatly. In the end, a chess puzzle for you where the task is to find the winning line for white. It's white to move, and I will wait for your answer in the comment section. Thanks for watching. In the end, feel free to check out these suggestions as well. I will see you in my next video. Take care. Hello chess lovers, I have a fantastic game for you played by the first undisputed world chess champion Wilhelm Steinitz against Mikhail Chigorin, who was a leading Russian chess player. He played 2 world championship matches against Wilhelm Steinitz, losing both times. By the way, this game is also taken from their world championship rematch. Steinitz started with e4 and e5 by Chigorin, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. We see the Spanish game, knight f6, Chigorin goes for this solid Berlin defense, d3, d6, c3, g6, knight d2, bishop g7, knight f1, black castles, bishop a4, knight d7, knight e3, knight c5, bishop c2. White is keeping alive this bishop. Later we will see what an important role this bishop is playing. Knight e6, and there it goes, h4. This can opener is going to destroy black king. Knight e7. Well, we can see that Chigorin is doing nothing to stop this pawn's aggression. Actually, h5 looks very pretty, but instead we see knight e7, and there it goes, h5. d5, trying to create some counterplay on the center, because white king, as you can see, is stuck in the center of the board. H takes g6, f takes g6, e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and there it goes. This dangerous bishop is coming to do its job. Queen c6, queen e2, bishop d7, bishop e3, developing the last piece. King h8, Chigorin is moving away his king from this dangerous a2 g8 diagonal, and Steinitz is castling queenside. Rook e8, queen f1, moving away the queen from this e file, and now white is preparing d4. a5, Chigorin is starting an attack on the queen side, but already it's too late. Here comes d4, e takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and there it goes, rook takes d4, keeping alive this bishop. This is a very important bishop. Well, already Chigorin's position is hopeless, but still he could prolong the game by playing rook f7 or rook e7. But instead, overlooking white's next threat, Chigorin captured on d4. Now you can pause the video and try to find the best move for white. Ready? When I was telling that it was better to play rook f7 or rook e7, I meant that black needed to cover his 7th rank, but this knight takes d4 move allows this fantastic rook takes h7 sacrifice. Did you find this move? Well, actually, instead of going for this rook sacrifice, bishop takes d4 is also winning. If rook f6, then the engine is offering a powerful deflective move. Can you find the best move for white? Ready? Actually, queen b5 is that deflective move. Now if queen takes b5, then bishop takes f6, and this is a checkmate. Or after queen b5, if bishop e6, which according to the engine the best defensive move, then simply queen takes c6 followed by bishop takes f6 check, king g8, rook e1, exchanging more pieces, simplifying the position, it's over. This is a simple win for white. But after knight takes d4, of course, Steinitz chose a more beautiful continuation. He captured on h7. This is of course winning faster. King takes h7, queen h1 check, king g7, bishop h6 check. Now we are witnessing a king hunt played during World Chess Championship. King f6, queen h4 check, king e5, here comes queen takes d4 check, and Chigorin resigned. If king f5, then g4, and we see my favorite checkmating pattern, checkmate with a pawn. I hope that you enjoyed this fantastic game. Waiting for your comments and questions. Good luck. Hello chess lovers, I have a fantastic game for you played by Vishwanathan Anand against Ivan Sokolov. The game was played in 1992 in Brussels. This was a rapid game and Anand started with e4, c5 by Sokolov, Sicilian defense, knight f3, e6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, a6, knight c3, d6, black goes for Scheveningen variation a4, preventing any possible advancement on the queen side, knight f6, bishop e2, knight d7, white castles king side, knight c5. Already there is too much pressure on e4 square. We see bishop f3, bishop e7, g3. Anand is going to place the bishop on g2 square and bring into life this f4 idea. Black castles king side, bishop g2. Of course, white is losing some precious time, but the pawn on e4 square is successfully defended, and on the other hand, the knight on c5 is not doing much. Queen c7, bishop e3, rook b8, and there it goes, f4. Rook e8, a bad move which gives white an easy chance to gain advantage. Here comes e5, a very standard move in Sicilian defense. D takes e5. Well, if we move like knight d7, then white can first capture on d6 and then play knight b5. If a takes b5, then knight takes b5. And after queen d8, white can simply capture on d6 and then play b4. This is simply a dominating position for white, and black is in a huge trouble. Black pieces are simply very passive. This is just crushing. Let's go back. That's why after e5 we see d takes e5, f takes e5, and knight d7. Of course, queen takes e5 can't be played because of this bishop f4 move. That's why we see knight d7. And now you can pause the video and try to find Anand's next move. Ready? In this position, Vishwanathan Anand simply played rook takes f7. Look at this magnificent rook sacrifice. He is just using the fact that black rook is moved on e8 square. Black accepted the sacrifice and captured on f7. Well, if a move like knight takes e5, then white can play bishop f4. Now if king takes f7, then queen h5 can be very unpleasant, followed by bishop takes e5, or if a move like queen d6, then king h1, a prophylactic move, and then queen h5, and again white has a very dangerous attack. It's very difficult to find a good move for black. Let's go back. That's why after rook takes f7, we see king takes f7. Here comes queen h5 check and king f8. Of course, this black king should always stick to the rook. Otherwise, if a move like king g8, then simply queen takes e8, and then the rook can come with a threat of queen f7 check and then queen f8. And if h6, then white can go for this beautiful tactical shot. Actually, this is a very beautiful variation, and after king h8, white can play another devastating move, rook f6. And if bishop takes f6, simply queen takes c7. This is just crushing. There are so many threats. Let's go back. After queen h5 check, we see king f8. Here comes rook f1 check, knight f6, and simply e takes f6. Bishop takes f6. And another powerful move by Anand. Can you find his next move? Ready? He simply played knight b5, sacrificing another piece. By the way, according to the engine, white had another beautiful way to win the game. For example, rook takes f6 was also playable. If g takes f6, then a powerful knight f5 sacrifice is winning, taking under control the e7 square, not allowing black king to escape and threatening bishop h6 check. If e takes f5, then bishop h6 check, and then knight d5 fork, and it's over. Let's go back, but after bishop takes f6, we see knight b5. Of course, this is also winning in a very beautiful style. A takes b5, knight takes b5, queen d7. Now as you can see, the knight on c5 is hanging, but Anand is not even paying attention to this poor knight. He's playing queen takes h7 with a devastating threat, rook takes f6, and still the knight is also hanging. For example, right now if I move like b6, just a random move, then rook takes f6 check, and then bishop h6 check, and black king is getting checkmated. That's why after queen h7 we see queen e7, overprotecting the bishop on f6 square, also the knight, but anyways we see this magnificent rook sacrifice on f6 square. Anand is sacrificing the second rook. Queen takes f6, bishop takes c5 check, rook e7, queen h8 check, king f7, knight d6 check, and finally Sokolov resigned. Well, if king g6, then simply bishop e4 check. Now king g5 can be met with queen h4 checkmate, and if a move like queen f5, then g4. A very beautiful move. This pawn is just full of nasty ideas. Now if queen takes e4, then instead of recapturing, simply queen h5 check followed by knight takes e4 checkmate. That's why, as I've already mentioned, after knight d6 check, Sokolov resigned. This was truly a spectacular game. We saw double rook sacrifice, a piece sacrifice, a magnificent attack, and finally all this placed black king in a hopeless position. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave your comments. Good luck. Hello chess lovers, Soren here, and in this video I would like to share with you another fascinating game played by the 8th world chess champion Mikhail Tal. His opponent is Yuriy Rantanen, and this game was played in 1979 at Keres Memorial. But before starting the game, would like to warm up your brain and please take a look at this position and try to find a winning move for white. I will wait for your answer in the comment section. And now, without further ado, let's go for our main game and see what happened on the board. Tal opened up with e4 and Rantanen responded with Sicilian defense. c5, knight f3, knight c6, and with bishop b5, white goes for Neshmetino for a Solimo attack. e6, another popular alternatives are g6 or d6. In our game we have e6, white castles kingside. Quite often white also captures on c6 as well, but in our game we have castling kingside, knight e7, black wants to play c6, after which is intending to recapture on c6 with a knight. We have knight c3, a6, bishop takes c6, knight takes c6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, d6, rook e1, bishop d7. Taking into consideration the fact that black was intending to recapture on c6 with a b pawn, in here it was better either to play queen c7 or bishop e7, but in our game we have bishop d7, and after knight takes c6, b takes c6, queen g4, black is starting to face some problems with the development of his kingside bishop. e5 by Rantanen, queen g3, and a very dubious decision f6. There was nothing wrong with queen f6, and of course this bishop g5 move can't harm black. Black can simply play queen g6. But in our game after queen g3 we have f6. Yes, black is intending to castle by hand by playing king f7, bishop e7, and then rook e8, bishop e3. But of course, as I've already mentioned, this is a strange decision and black is losing too many tempos. King f7, rook d1, bishop e7, knight a4. The knight can both jump on b6 or even at some point this c4, c5 advancement is playable. We have rook b8, b3, rook e8, c4. And once black is creating a hole on d5 by playing c5, the knight is hurrying on d5, bishop f8, and this time we have f4. Tal is organizing his attack, meanwhile still black is consolidating his position. King g8, we have rook f1, queen c8, f takes e5, f takes e5, and there it goes, a perfect outpost for the knight. Right now the threat is knight f6 check, that's why Rantanen moved away his king from the dangerous g5, but as the rook is no longer controlling the f7 square, the rook penetrates. Yes, rook f7 is on the board. Bishop g4, and now you can pause the video and try to find Mikhail Tal's next moves. Ready? Well, as you can see right now, the rook on d1 is hanging, but here Tal played knight f6. Look at this, guys. But the rook on d1 is untouchable because of this queen h4 move. Now if h5, then queen g5 is coming. The threat is queen h6 check and then rook h7 checkmate. If rook b7, queen g6 is winning. Or after queen h4, if h6, then white can go for this dazzling queen sacrifice, after which can announce a checkmate. That's why in our game after knight f6 we have g takes f6, black accepted the knight sacrifice, and we have queen h4 with a direct mating threat, bishop g7 and bishop h6. And finally, after bishop h6, black accepted the rook sacrifice, which allows white to mate in 5. But let's take a look at other continuations as well. What if rook g8? Then in here white can capture on d6. If rook b7, then rook f6 is very strong. And after the exchange of rooks on f7, bishop e6, rook takes g7, rook takes g7. Queen f6. Yes, again this is going to be winning. White can win the rook on g7, and after queen takes e6, this queen endgame is going to be winning for white. White has 2 extra pawns, and also there are too many weaknesses in black's camp. Or after bishop h6, if a move like queen e6, which is actually the best continuation, then bishop takes g7 check is coming. If king g8, then rook takes f6. Yes, again this is a total destruction. The best continuation is to give away the queen, but even in this case black can hardly save this position. The g-pawn is also coming, and white has a huge advantage. Although again I have to mention that of course this could have prolonged black's resistance, but in our game we have bishop takes d1. Here Tal captured on g7, and after king g8 he made another beautiful move. Can you find that move? Ready? He played bishop h8. Look at this epic move, guys. Yes, Tal needs his bishop on h8 and not on f6. This f6 square is for the queen. Black accepted the second rook sacrifice as well, after which Tal captured on f6, and after king g8 Tal announced a checkmate. Of course it can be rarely seen when Tal's opponents are playing up to a checkmate, but I guess Rantanen felt that such a sweet combination deserves to be completed and played up to the checkmate. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this magnificent attack. I have already forgot how many sacrifices we saw in this game. For more games, consider subscribing to my channel. Also press the bell button to get notified about new uploads. I will see you in my next video.